It's a bit of a different video today aimed at my subscribers. I really value everybody that's been engaging with the channel. In fact, it's taken me a little bit by surprise. And I've had a few questions over the last weeks which I feel I haven't fully responded to. I have read them all and I've had in mind to make some videos responding fully to things, but I decided it might be best to just have a bit of a chat rather than keep not getting around to making a detailed video that explains something that I've been asked. So diving straight in, one of the first questions I got asked was by Jamie Tregidjo. I've probably mispronounced the name, sorry Jamie. And you were one of my earlier subscribers, I think, and I've been really glad to engage with you and answer questions you've had. So you said, how did I start out? You said you'd be interested to know how I started out. I'm going to cover that first because it answers some of the other questions. So, short story, I trained in architecture after a gap year after school. I did a degree in architecture at Sheffield, did a year in practice, worked as a musician for a year, dabbled with that, but always had loved making things with my hands. And I think I was a little unsatisfied in architecture because I wanted to see things through to completion, and I felt frustrated only designing. For some time I was saying to myself, it's too late to retrain. I should have done an apprenticeship, but I was pushed down the academic route. But eventually in my late 20s, with the encouragement of my wife, I took an adult apprenticeship, although really it was just a very informal arrangement with a joiner who needed a driver and was looking for an older apprentice. So I learnt alongside him doing general joinery, door hanging and that sort of thing, and he was kind of unreliable, and I started getting my own jobs, and completely without a plan and never having intended to run a business, I found myself self-employed, found I could create a bit of a niche niche market with the custom design, because I felt very underexperienced as a joiner, but I could bring my architectural skills in to do the custom design. So I just found myself getting more and more fitted furniture type jobs and started kicking and screaming, building a business. And so I've had an imposter mentality for years, and that's still hanging on a little bit, although I'm just about over it. But that's how I got into doing what I do, and I've just learned along the way, much more self-taught than I would have liked to be, and I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. I would recommend working for a long time under somebody else, learning from their mistakes, so you have fewer mistakes of your own to make when it's costing you. But that's the route I took. So going on to other questions from subscribers. So Darren asked at some point, you said you'd like to know more about how I price in front of customers. I mentioned on one of the Sketchup videos that I design and price in front of customers. Now that mainly applies to our standard range of alcove work, which has a price list, which is on one of my websites called sheffieldalcovestorage.com. But you can see it there. That's an old dirty copy. So that was the result of a long period of refining the process of manufacture until that was standardized, and then looking in detail at the labor and material costs for each element. And I quickly realized it only made sense if I had a fixed rate, which I set at £150. So that covers me seeing the customer, doing the design, email communication, etc., and then loading the van, setting up in the house, clearing up. I just figured out any job I do, small or large, is going to have a certain element of fixed costs. And then on top of that, I figured out a rate per cupboard. Now, if you're thinking of pricing this way, there's things like this where you need to have a bit of a mental shift, and you have to go from trying to pin down the exact price to saying there's a benefit to saying, well, it's going to be about this much, even though some cupboards are wider or some of them are butted up against a very difficult scribe against a rough brick wall or something like that. There's a benefit to saying it's this much per cupboard and just making sure that you're covered for the trickier jobs, because then you can just bang out the quotes quicker, and customers like to see the breakdowns, so it makes sense. It might come to £2,000, which they might have thought is more than they first thought, but when they see, well, it's that much for a cupboard, that much for a shelf, it starts to make sense. So I can price a job like that in front of customers, and I'm moving towards pricing other more bespoke jobs, but that's something I continue to find a big challenge, is having a consistent pricing structure for such varied work. So that is a work in progress. Now on to other comments. Jamie again, he asked about keeping track of large cutting lists. You shared with me, Jamie, on one of the comments about how you'd prepared a cutting list, taken it to B&Q, and then got all these boards which you couldn't figure out what was what. It took you ages to figure it out. Now I'll show you. Well, I'll show you a current project that's quite large. So this is hot off the press. I've just found this on Graham's desk. So I've now delegated a lot of the production drawings to Graham. And the thing to notice about our approach to things is that we will give a name to each unit, usually from left to right and top to bottom, A, B, C, D, etc. And then each part of that unit has a code. So the left side, or gable you might call it, is L, so that would be A-L if it's on a unit, A-R for right, A-BP for back panel, and then B for bottom, T for top, and then S, S1, S2, etc., and D for dividers. So we've got a code, so we will then produce cutting lists from Sketchup, but rather than manually arranging them on a board, which I used to do, we use a plugin called CutList, which sadly is only Windows based. So Graham runs that, and the main reason I haven't yet done a video on that is that it's not on my Mac, and I just don't really like PCs, and I've delegated that, and Graham does it, and it's just harder for me to do a video showing it on the PC. But the output from CutList is like this. So does that have? Yeah, well, so you've got things like Unit A, L, cover panel. So there's a bit more detail. When we cut that out, so that will go to the table saw to be cut out by Brady and Jonathan now. Jonathan's our new apprentice. They will, as they cut a piece, they will label it on the back edge in Sharpie pen, and on the face, if there is a face that will be unpainted and unseen. But generally the back edge, so when it's stacked up, you know what's what. So our process is we'll cut and immediately label. It is trickier when you're getting someone else to cut, as Jamie was. That's something we used to do. We used to get Arnold Lavers to cut all our boards. And I think it's interesting to think about how at different stages of growth of the business, you'll have an idea about how to do stuff, and it seems very clever at the time. So let's outsource the cutting. We don't have to deal with the dust. They'll cut quicker and more accurately than us with our current setup. And then you start to find all the problems with it. So you're less in control, something's done wrong, they don't appreciate the accuracy where it's needed, and all that sort of stuff. So you usually, as you grow, you bring more back in-house. So, well, I suppose that's about covering the cutting thing. I'm sure there's much more I could say. Just while I'm on that, I might as well just show you some more of the drawings so you know how we prepare drawings. So you have the overview that you saw before, you have the cutting list, you then have individual units, and our standard is to show the width, the height, and then the shelf heights from the bottom of the unit to the bottom of the shelves. And when we have a run of units, well, maybe something like this, we would take all the side panels and then mark the bottoms of the shelves in pencil on the front edge, and we have a squaring jig that we use to clamp and align the shelves, and then we just screw through from the side panel. You might have seen that squaring jig in the big oak project that went kind of wrong with the staining problems. I think the video is called Simple Design Complex Build. You'll see in one of those shots a little MDF squaring jig that we use for assembling shelves. So back to questions that have been asked. Regarding that project I just mentioned, Dave Murray said that you use methylated spirits based stain from Morels. I was very interested to hear about that, and I do intend to try it. You said, why do I use water-based stain? Well, mainly just because that's what was recommended to me. I don't consider myself an expert on wood finishing. because I don't need to be, because I just go ask Mark Finney, who is a real expert based near Sheffield. And whenever I've asked him for stains, he's just recommended water-based. I've been meaning to pick his brains on why. I tend to like water-based because it's easy to clean up and it's fairly quick drying. However, Dave, you've said the meths is quick drying as well, and I know mess-based stuff can be. So I need to try that out. And do tell me, are you spraying that? I'm guessing you're spraying that, because that's a new thing to me, is to spray stain. I've always hand applied it. So there's something I'm far from an expert on. Now, I recently had some communication with Anthony James Brown, someone else who's engaged from the start. So thanks for your comments, Anthony. And you were asking for help with an issue that I expect a lot of us have come across as fitted furniture makers, which is thick doors on sprung hinges jamming, and issues to do with the gap, and when the door goes from flat closed to open, that thickness then jams against the other door. And you were using 22mm doors. I've had it with 25mm. Now, I think it's the sort of experience you have to get to understand these kind of things better. I think you do have to go through some pain when you're learning stuff to then really understand the issues. And one of the things I pointed you towards was, I don't know if you got the Hayfully catalogue. This is a really old one. Now, these charts that you get for hinges, now these are the hinges that I used for ages before I moved to Blum. This chart here is worth studying. Now let me just see if I can get this in a better angle. Right, so what you've got on these charts is 3 sets of lines which, where they intersect, is what you're looking for. So DBE is the distance of the bore from the edge of the door. So that's the distance of the edge of the 35mm hole to the edge of the door. That's your DBE, which is these lines. Gap C is the minimum gap that you should design for between the meeting edges of the doors on the hinge side. And then you've got your door thickness. Sorry, if I put this out of shot. Right, then you've got your door thickness. So what this is showing, for example, is if your gap between the edge of your door and your drilled hole is 4mm, then let's see, if you have a gap of 1mm, sorry about this, I'm hardly seeing what I'm showing you. If you have a gap of 1mm at the meeting edge, go along to your 4, your maximum door thickness will be 32mm. I'm surprised about that. Oh, and you know why? You know why that is? Because this, I just happened to be looking at a thick door hinge, and in fact, unusually, this has a 40mm cup. So there you go. This is a thick door hinge, and this is what I was telling Anthony about. There are certain hinges that are designed with a geometry so that when they open, they sort of throw in more for this reason, so that you don't get the doors jamming against each other, which is what happened. So sorry for not planning this better, but that's a thick door hinge. You then compare that graph. You've got a very different shaped graph to, this is the hinge I used as standard for ages. So that, if you were to interpret that, you would see that your doors would not be able to be so thick at certain door gaps. Okay, I hope that's been a little bit helpful. That's another thing that I've been thinking about doing a detailed video on, but it would need some planning to do it. I could do with doing it better than that, couldn't I? So I may get round to that. Now, last couple of questions. Yeah, so Black T1 Sugar, I don't know what your real name is. You asked a few questions a while back, and it was just generally you were interested in how I make design decisions for different situations for built-in furniture. Why would the shelves sometimes come flush to a chimney breast and sometimes be further back? You also were touching on issues about scribing allowance and things like lining up to picture rails and stuff like that. So, well, I think when I first started out, it was all very much completely from scratch, very bespoke, and the customer led it more. So I'd say, well, what do you want? Do you want it to finish in this way or whatever? These days, I've semi-standardized for various reasons, which I've touched on before, but partly because I've kind of figured out what tends to work and what tends to look right. So generally a chunky alcove shelf is 27 centimeters. I know it sounds a funny depth, but that is the depth we've settled on, because it usually fits within a typical alcove depth, which is usually sort of 30 to 35 centimeters. And it looks right set back, and it doesn't look too deep, so the books don't look lost in the depth of it. So there's certain things where I will just now steer customers, and sometimes they don't even ask the question or think about it. It's just like, right, I've drawn it that way, and that's fine. But then if there's a reason, I suppose the thing is there's always got to be a reason for something. I don't like an arbitrary design decision, but if it's justifiable, it's good. So curves, for example, I'll do things with curves where there's a corner that you'd be knocking your knee on if you're coming into the room and it wasn't curved, or some other reason where it just blends a design element into it. Here's an example. So our living room here, the doors I want to change, they're just door samples, they're just what I used. But there's an angle on that, a subtle angle on that, and the reason for that is that I just felt that it addressed the room better, and I'm showing you all the mess now. I just felt it addressed the couch and also gave a bit of a flow from the door into the room to then this opening that we cut through to the dining and kitchen. So there's always got to be a reason. There's very little I do that's just an arbitrary, oh, that looks nice. And even when it comes to asymmetrical layouts, this in fact doesn't show this example, but a lot of when I put dividers in asymmetrical arrangements, they're almost always on a third point, because that's pleasing to the eye. This one was a little bit more random. Looking at this again, you talked about scribing allowances and how do you fit furniture into a space. I would almost always make the furniture undersized so that I could make it in the workshop in a controlled environment and it's square, and I would know without a doubt that it would go in even if the wall is a little bit wonky. Now the standard that we've settled on is to undersize the units by 36 millimeters either side. This is a bit different, I can't really tell you why, but 36 millimeters, we settled on that because it pretty much always clears the skirting. Occasionally you get a skirting that's maybe 30 millimeters thick, although usually it's more like 20, but you can pretty much guarantee that that clearance will ensure that the unit just goes straight in, even if its plinth is shorter than the skirting. And then we have a standard scribing width of 56 millimeters. And the reason for that is when an alcove unit is sticking forward of a chimney breast, we'll put that 56 millimeter strip on over a triple thickness of 18 millimeter, and then it's got a 2 millimeter overhang into the unit, so it covers the carcass, and we have what's called an inset hinge that throws the door in. So this is just why we settled on 36, because then you have that width at the chimney side, and then it means that your scribe to the wall is visually the same. So it's part of the system that I developed over the years, which led to this whole standardization. It was just one of those elements of standardizing. So those are 56 millimeter strips either side of the door. So that's how we do it. We'll just make it undersized and put a scribe strip on. I used to obsess over trying to get it as tight to the wall as possible and not losing any storage space, but you just learn that it's not really that significant, and it pays to have a standard method that is always going to work. So lining up to picture rails, when there was a picture rail in the room, I used to try and get a shelf always in line with it, and I sometimes even would run a matching picture rail across a chunky shelf, until I found that pretty much every time the picture rail was wonky and didn't match up level, and I was much better just ignoring it, fitting above or below it, or just letting it run into a fitted bookcase and then get concealed. And again, the 36 millimeter gap will usually conceal the picture rail. So I try to be non-destructive and not rip anything off. I just like to fit into the space and then scribe my cover strip over it. And then just one final thing on scribing allowances and stuff like that. Wherever anything like a scribe or a countertop meets the wall, we will make it in the workshop 20 millimeters oversize, which is maybe overdoing it, but that's the standard again that we've settled on. So I know I'll be cutting that back and I won't have a piece that's too small. And with fitting to the ceiling and fitting to the floor, you just give yourself quite a lot of tolerance. So you know that even if you have to level it quite a lot, there's a lot of play, and then the scribe or the plinth is plenty oversized, so you know that it will fit in and all look tight and fitted. Right, so I'm feeling there's something else I was going to say. Oh yeah, just briefly. You don't know much about me, and I don't see why you should particularly, but I've been thinking about touching a little bit more on the realities of running a business and family and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to say a little bit more about me. So I'm married. I've got 2 kids. My youngest, my son, is 2 years old, and he was born 3 months premature, and he has disability. He had brain damage and cerebral palsy. And I think the main reason I'm saying that is just to say that I've got family commitments. I'm a busy guy, and I don't always manage to find the time to edit videos. And if I do, often it's late at night. And I know there's a lot of people watching this with their own. We've all got our own unique issues in life. Probably lots of us have family, kids. You're trying to pay the bills, spend time with your kids, make ends meet, all that sort of stuff. So I relate to that, and let me know if you're interested in more videos just talking about getting that balance right. And something else I'm interested in is mental health, and that might seem a bit out of the blue, but it's an observation that I've made that I don't think it's uncommon for people in this line of work to struggle on some level with mental health. Because if you're a very detail-oriented guy and you're trying to make a business out of that, your detail orientation sometimes is at odds with the things that are necessary to make the business work, and your tendency to think in detail can lead to overthinking, which can cause all sorts of stresses and depression and stuff like that. And that's something that, if it's something that would engage with people, I'd happily talk more about. So do feedback if that's of interest. Well, I think I've talked enough, and my little work light that I was using to try and give me a bit more light has just run out of battery, so I'll call it a day at that. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing and engaging. If you've watched this far on this video, then I guess you count as a true fan, so I do appreciate that, and do keep feeding back to me and asking me questions. And if I haven't mentioned you and you're still waiting for an answer on something, forgive me and do prompt me on it. Okay, thanks again. See you soon.